Alright, so today on High Impact Garage we're going to do something a little different. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about the Nissan 240SX, pros, cons, and I'm actually going to walk you through a car that we actually have worked on and show you some of the pros and some of the cons. Alright, so this is a 1998 Nissan 240SX, and it's owned by a dear customer of ours, and we are in the process on this car of taking care of some things. We actually have wrapped up this car, and now it's ready to go home. I'm going to go over some things. First, let's get inside the car, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the features of the car and some of the styling on the car. So this being a 1998 model, you're going to notice it's very, very, very contemporary. There's not a real sporty feel to it aside from these white gauges. And what's cool about these white gauges is that when you turn the headlights on, you get white, the lettering becomes white, and then of course the rest of the gauge ends up blacked out. So you end up with this kind of black gauge effect at night and white gauge effect during the day. Air conditioning controls are pretty much standard for this particular year. These are like a push button style. All of the 240s had a push button style power setup for their air conditioning. This car, of course, has has AC. But yeah, these controls and everything are very reminiscent of. Well, the dash layout is very reminiscent of something you would find back in the 1990s from Nissan, whether it's a Sentra or a Maxima or a 240SX. A common noted thing, though, is that a lot of these cars came with an automatic. You figure that in the late 90s, automatics became much more prevalent than manual transmissions. This car was originally an automatic. Swapping them from automatic to manual is quite easy, and that's what's been done on this car. But again, most of the time you're going to find these cars, they're going to be automatics. That's one pitfall. And why is it a pitfall? Nissan's automatic isn't that bad. The Jatco trans that they use, the 4-speed overdrive trans, actually was super reliable. The trouble is the Jatco 4-speed automatic that they used also had odd shift points and shifted very early. That's pretty much normal for Nissan in that era. They would shift up early, and whereas that helped them get some good fuel economy, it did not make them feel very sporty. And so compared to the contemporaries of that time, it felt like it was lugging the engine down. Look at something else this car does not have. This car also does not have a sunroof. Sunroofs were fading by the end of the 1990s. So 98, this car doesn't have a sunroof. I think it was optional, but that option was not highly checked off at that point either. My wife had a 1993, however, and it definitely had a sunroof, and I think almost all of them had sunroofs. It's very hard to find a non-sunroof S14 240SX. So coming out of the interior, you're going to find one of the other nice parts about one of these cars. They are a pillarless door, so you do not have a door pillar surrounding the window frame. It's a super nice feature of these cars. By 1998, they had a 4-lug bolt pattern, which helped in brake upgrades. This car actually has one of the brake upgrades that was very popular, and that is the Z32 4-piston calipers. Now these the brakes that came stock were not very extraordinary. They were actually pretty pitiful, and so these Z32 4-pots are very, very, very good compared to what the car came with originally. And these have been rebuilt by us and effectively repainted, so they look a lot better and a lot nicer, and they work really good. So let's go talk about kind of the meat and potatoes of what makes a 240 a 240. 240SX refers to the engine displacement. So way back in the 240Z, the 280Z, the 260Z, the 300ZX, that's all related to displacement. So this particular engine is a 2.4 liter engine. You multiply 2.4 by 100 and you get a 240. So that's actually where the naming comes from. This is a 2389cc Ka24 DE engine. The version in the S14 is actually supposedly less or derated from the 155 horse that was in the earlier models, but it's still a wonderful engine, makes great power, good setup. The cool thing about the 240's engine, the Ka24, is that it makes a ton of torque compared to what you would have found in that era, and power delivery is amazing out of this setup, especially considering there's no variable cam timing. And today, variable cam timing is one of the ways that we help improve the volumetric efficiency of the engine. So these engines were exceptionally efficient even without that. One of the pitfalls on the Ka24 is that the cam timing chain comes up from the bottom and comes to an idler point, and then it transfers from one chain to the chain that runs across the camshafts. And there's a bolt that holds that upper cam gear in place that transfers, and that can get stripped out of the cylinder head. This one was perfectly fine. We had this engine completely apart. This one was perfectly fine, but it will sometimes strip out of the cylinder head, and the only fix at that point is to drill it out and put in a time cert. Luckily, this one is perfect. And as stated, we've had this engine completely out of the car. So that thing has been pulled out, resealed, regasketed, and put back in. Maybe pitfall, maybe not. The radiators on these cars were actually a one-core plastic tank aluminum radiator. This is an upgrade. This Mishimoto right here is a great upgrade. I've never had a cooling system issue on a 240 that was in stock form. And so the radiator thing is just nice because you don't have the plastic tanks that can crack. Actually, I've had that happen on a 240, but I've had that happen on a lot of other cars too. So this is a nice upgrade. The other thing is, like, this has got an open element air filter. I'm not a huge fan of open element air filters. The factory air box actually flowed perfectly. It did really well. But this was an upgrade done prior to the customer buying the car. The other thing about this is, yes, a cast iron exhaust manifold, but the flow through the manifold is actually pretty good. If you notice, it goes into, like, 1 and 4 are paired, 2 and 3 actually are paired. They kind of come down through the casting, go into 2 ports, so they come down and then they join under the car. Maybe we'll go under there and take a look. All right, let's take a look at that exhaust as it comes down. So it comes down into this head pipe, and then it wides together at this point. So you have, it's not a long tube header, but it's as close as you're gonna get in factory form. It actually does really good, especially considering this is technology from 1998. And that's kind of the thing. This is all technology from 1998, guys. The 90s was a good time for Nissan and a good time for auto companies. Let's take a look at one pitfall that I hate on 240s, and it's not an easy to remedy pitfall. The issue at hand are the motor mounts. So if you look at these, that's the motor mount right there. And those are Megan Racing ones. We had to buy those for this car because factory ones don't exist. But there's one there, and there's one there. And those are supposed to be liquid-filled motor mounts. What happens is that they are soft. They're oftentimes too soft, and they rip in this area here. The fluid drips out of it, and then you end up with a loose motor mount. These are a heavier durometer rubber, so they do transfer more noise, but I'm told that over time that these mounts will start to soften up and they won't transfer as much noise, but these are going to be a little bit more reliable than the old stuff that came with the car. And of course, when you're doing the engine mounts, you're going to also do the transmission mount. These have a tendency to tear right here and right here on the rubber. This mount right here is a little bit stiffer because they also added a little ribbing of rubber up and down. So it does transfer a little more noise, but it's not going to tear out like the other ones do. What happens is this will collapse when that tears out, and then it'll just sag, and then you'll start hearing a lot of noise. Another common point of failure on the Nissan 240SX is the power steering system. They are notorious for leaking from this point right here. They sometimes leak from the body right here. The boots tear. Fluid leaks is a big issue on these. This rack has been replaced, well, not replaced. This rack has been rebuilt by a local rebuilder that we have, who rebuilds for, well, they remanufacture for a remanufacturing company. They're very good. We've also replaced the return line and the pressure line, so these are good to go. This also has, these rack bushings sometimes go bad over time. One of the things that we like to do is replace them with a polyurethane. That way it has less feeling of slop. That's one of the things we like to do. This car has an upgrade that the original cars did not have. This is an aluminum drive shaft. The nice thing about an aluminum drive shaft is it gets rid of something that would have mounted right here. This right here is where your carrier bearing would have sit. And the reason they had a carrier bearing drive shaft is that they could use a rubber coupler here, and then they could split the shaft here and then drop it out over there. And it worked, it did good, it did a fine job. There's not really any articulation between, but it was all about noise absorption. So when you take off on this thing, it's a direct connection, there's no flex. So aluminum drive shaft for the win, but yes, more noise, but less inertia. The other thing to talk about is this rear differential. So these cars, this is not the stock differential. This is actually something out of an Infiniti J30. This has a viscous limited slip differential assembly inside of it. The nice thing about this is that you, like I say, you get the VLSD. But these units and the R200s are really tough. The rear suspension in particular is oftentimes taken completely out of these cars and grafted into other cars. So it's an excellent suspension, but this rear differential's stout as nails. I particularly like the finning on this cover. It helps get a little bit of air to cool that oil down. Something we did on this car, we replaced these bushings right here on the rear diff. These bushings are a little stiffer, so they do transfer some noise. I've been saying a lot of transference of noise because a lot of the bushings that Nissan put in this car are super soft. And even the rubber Nismo replacements are way stiffer than the stock stuff. So it will make more noise, it'll feel more positive though. So we also changed the these bushings right here. There's 4 of these. This is the subframe bushings for the rear diff. And the originals were polyurethane, and man, that was a jarring ride. But I'm sure it helped out somehow. One of the nice things about the 240 is that you can't go too small on the exhaust. This is a nice 2.5-inch exhaust. I think BRM makes it. My friend Greg deals with these guys. This is a MagnaFlow muffler, and then they also include a resonator right here to try and help deaden the noise a bit. It's still kind of Still got some loudness to it, and when you get on it, it definitely has that good feel. So one of the benefits of a 240SX is there is, or was, stuff. Yeah, see, I got dirt all. There was stuff for these cars to make them handle even better directly through Nismo, and that's what these control arms are. These are all Nismo arms for the rear suspension on both sides, and this car is really well set up with these aftermarket adjustable shock absorbers in the back, and I think the front is adjustable as well, but not obviously on a control knob on the bottom. So here we are with a 240. We're gonna kind of wrap this video up, but this is this is an S14 240SX, and the cool part about the S14 is it's a much more refined version of the S13. So much about this car is relatable to the S13, while at the same time not being. And there's just so much about these cars that are great from a driving perspective. This is a car you could drive for hours and hours and hours on end, and it's very comfortable and very capable. So yeah, the S14 is a beautiful car and a great car. Love the Sylvia styling. It's a beautiful car. Now, my personal preference is always going to be the S13, just because my wife had an S13, and there's a lot of sentimentality to that. But I am never going to say that the S13 is better than the S14, because each generation of this car brings so much to the table, so much good to the table. So if you're looking for a really awesome rear drive car that that handles, that does things that you want it to do, and has a really good starting point for a lot of different power builds, the S chassis is great. The S14 is a great and beautiful car. It's going to be a classic as we get older and as things go on. Just keep in mind, when you go buy something like this, the biggest drawback of the S chassis is that they are so popular that finding a clean one that you can keep up, that you don't have to spend a lot of money on, is getting very difficult, especially considering the drift tax we end up with on so many of these cars. So the idea here is buy the cleanest you can and know that you're going to be putting money into these cars. Something else I probably ought to pop in and show you just as a bonus thing. Let's go into that. Alright, so this car is an excellent example, so I'm not saying there's anything wrong here, but I am trying to point out something that you should always check in on. So, if these cars get curbed or hit hard, look along this frame rail in front. Get on your hands and knees and look to make sure that this frame rail is straight. And then the other thing is, make sure that these are not bent. That's a good indicator that the car's been in a wreck, if those are bent. And a lot of these did get bent because people couldn't control people put it into oversteer and or understeer, and then they boom smacked it. A good dead giveaway that you have a problem is if you look at these arms right here and they are adjustable. That is a dead giveaway that there is a problem. If it looks like the car's been repainted and it looks like a lot of stuff is either missing or broken. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed my ramblings on the 240SX. It's a great car. The S chassis cars are wonderful. In stock form, they do well, they do great. And there's a lot to love about these cars. So, in the meantime, just send, if you ever have any questions, feel free to send them, comment on the video, or even send them to patrick@highimpactlv.com. I'm willing to do videos for basically anything that's Nissan or Datsun related. And we're here trying to record what we do. So in the meantime, catch you on another episode.